In suburban Denver, where the Rockies puncture the horizon and every street has a name you could imagine on a postcard, lives and deaths are supposed to be straightforward. But sometimes the neat lines people draw around a life tear, and what's left behind is not what anyone expected. Daniel Everett Collins was 42, a software engineer by trade, a neighbor by necessity, a husband by choice. He lived at 7429 Willow Creek Drive with his wife Marissa Lynn Parker, in a house that looked like most other houses on the block. Well-kept, slightly modern, a for sale sign in the yard for all the neighbors to talk about. To colleagues, Daniel was brilliant and insufferable in equal measures. Precise to a fault, prone to long nights debugging code, and capable of sudden, explosive anger when things didn't add up. At home, by most accounts, he was quiet, protective, possessive in small ways that friends later used to explain the line between care and control.
Daniel, he loved routines. He liked to fix things. Coffee at 7, he would say. If you want chaos in the morning, skip the calendar. Heat, long breath. He was my person. We were planning a trip in June. He already had the itinerary on his laptop. He was taken from us. It's the hardest thing I've ever said.
On a damp Tuesday morning in late March, the Colorado State Patrol called it an accident. A single-car crash on a rain-slick mountain pass outside Boulder. A vehicle wholly consumed by flames. The investigators reported charred remains too badly burned to be instantly identified. Fingerprints, dental records, the mechanisms of closure would follow. Marissa was notified. She was driven to the scene in a police cruiser and asked to look at what was left. An impossibly small, impossible thing that the world has to accept when science and grief meet. The medical examiner's determination that there are no signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play at the crash site, cause consistent with high-speed impact and thermal injury.
We all live twice. Once in our bodies, once in the stories people tell after we're gone. Daniel tried to control both lives. In the end, he controlled neither.
We said the Lord's Prayer, and we remembered his light. Marissa wanted it simple. She wanted people to focus on the life, not the tragedy. That was their wish.
In the days after, neighbors left casseroles on the porch. Cards flooded the mailbox. The community, which had been a backdrop for Daniel's private life, turned on its kindness like a theater before the curtain fell.
When the coffin went down, I thought that would be the end. That's what everyone told me. That at least I had closure.
Closure is a fragile thing. It depends on records, on paperwork, on the trust we place in institutions charged with recording life and death. For most of the town, that trust held. Daniel Collins was gone. For others, tiny inconsistencies began to stack like hairline cracks.
We followed protocols. We assume identification is accurate when the family signs off. Marissa signed. The cremation was authorized. Those forms are legal documents. You accept them. But later, months later, I remember thinking there was something different about the way items had been handled. It was small, administrative. But once something like that is lodged in your head, you can't unsee it.
Grief does strange things to a community. Hardens into conviction. Asks questions. But grief is not investigation. For the first months, the police file closed with a tragic box checked. Accidental death. Yet, a story does not always die with a signature on a death certificate. It has a longer life in the hands of those who notice what others dismiss. A note misfiled at the county records office. A CCTV frame that didn't quite match the timeline. A petty landlord's nagging suspicion. Some of the threads that would later unravel the neatness of Daniel's funeral began far from Denver, in a different city entirely. But every knot in a story has two ends, and ours would eventually reveal how the appearance of an end can be a beginning.
Daniel kept to himself mostly. He worked late, came home. Sometimes you'd see him pacing the backyard talking into his phone. Once, we heard him shout at someone. It sounded like a man fighting with his own head. But who knows? People have fights inside their heads. We all do.
In the weeks after the funeral, some friends tried to make sense of the space Daniel left. They scrolled through his social media, reached out to old colleagues, checked flight records for a planned excursion they thought he had scheduled. Everyone tried to find the seams. What no one saw at the time was that a single thread, a line in a maintenance log from a self-storage facility, an unremarkable signature on a release form, would months later look like an instruction manual for a lie. The town had moved on. The driveway at 7429 Willow Creek was mowed less diligently. A for sale sign faded under the sun. Flowers wilted. But stories are stubborn. They collect small facts like lint, and when enough lint gathers, someone will pick at the seam. On the surface, Daniel Collins had died. On paper, he had a grave. In the months to come, new voices would ask an older question. Had he ever gone at all? 6 months after Daniel Everett Collins was buried in Denver, an incident more than 1,000 miles away would breathe life back into a story the city thought was finished. Jonathan Michael Reyes owned and managed several low-rent properties on the north side of Chicago. He wasn't the kind of man who called police for broken locks or teenagers cutting through alleys. But on a quiet September night, something unsettled him enough to make a report.
I'd had a unit empty for a couple months. I go to check the locks every now and then. That night, the front door was ajar. Not kicked in, not pried open, just unlocked. I thought maybe squatters or kids. But when I walked upstairs, it was clear someone had been there. Somebody neat. There was a chair angled toward the window, a cigarette but in a dish, and on the floor, a wrapper from a protein bar.
Reyes reported the incident to local police, assuming it was nothing. But then days later, a neighbor provided a shaky phone clip. A tall man walking quickly from the building late at night. The footage was grainy, distorted by a street lamp glare. But to Jonathan Reyes, the man's profile was chillingly familiar.
When I saw that video, I said, "That's him. That's the guy they said died in Colorado." I'd seen the story on the news. His face stuck with me. It was Daniel Collins.
Police took the claim, filed it, and moved on. The official record still stood. Daniel Collins was dead. But sometimes suspicion needs a second echo before it becomes undeniable. Back in Denver, Marissa Lynn Parker was struggling to stitch together the life her husband's supposed death had torn apart. The house on Willow Creek was now hers alone. Bills, mortgage, silence, and then the letters.
The first one came in August. No return address. Just those words. Then another. And another. Always signed. D. At first, I thought it was some sick joke. But after the third letter, I couldn't sleep. I thought, what if?
The handwriting was mechanical, typed on an old ribbon-fed typewriter. There were no fingerprints. But the tone, the familiarity, felt surgical.
When Mrs. Parker came to us, we treated it as harassment. Stalkers sign letters with all sorts of initials. But something about her face when she said, "Daniel," I knew she believed it. Sometimes belief is the first lead you take seriously.
Detectives cross-checked old case files, comparing incident reports with interstate databases. Then a breakthrough. The Chicago footage, flagged months earlier, was matched against surveillance algorithms. A partial fingerprint from the Maplewood property had been lifted from a doorknob. A print belonging to a man who had a death certificate. A fingerprint is not a belief. It is not grief. It is evidence. The case, once closed, was quietly reopened. Daniel Collins was no longer a widower's ghost. He was a fugitive in plain sight.
Daniel hated to lose. In work, in arguments, in anything. If you crossed him, he'd find a way to settle it. He'd talk about unfinished business. Back then, I thought it was just Daniel being dramatic. Now, I don't know.
Detectives traced Daniel's movements through financial crumbs, a prepaid debit card purchased in Chicago, a storage locker rented under a pseudonym. Inside they found little. A camping stove, a set of clothes, a locked box with a lock pried off. What remained inside was more unsettling. Olivia Harper Dawson, a name from Daniel's past. A former business partner from a failed Austin startup. Years earlier, she had testified against him in a fraud investigation, a testimony that left him bankrupt and humiliated. The photograph was more than coincidence. It was a signpost, a road pointing south. Authorities began to connect the dots. The fake death, the letters, the sightings. A picture was forming of a man willing to erase his own existence to return for revenge. For Marissa, the terror was personal. For investigators, it was professional. But for Olivia Harper Dawson, it was about to be fatal. In Austin, Texas, life had moved forward for Olivia Harper Dawson. 36 years old, she had rebuilt herself after the implosion of a failed tech startup. She was a project manager now, respected, confident, and cautious. But the past has a way of hunting down those who try to leave it behind. Years earlier, Olivia testified in a federal investigation into securities fraud tied to Daniel Collins' company. Her testimony, blunt and precise, stripped him of credibility and left him bankrupt. She thought she had closed that chapter, but someone else had decided it was unfinished. In late October, residents of Pinehurst Lane began noticing a vehicle idling on their street at odd hours. One neighbor reported a man sitting alone, scribbling in a notebook. Police would later confirm the plates were stolen. The VIN filed down.
It was unsettling. Same car every night like clockwork. I told my husband, if he's casing houses, he's wasting his time. People work from home here. I wish now I had called someone sooner.
On the night of October 27th, Olivia Dawson returned home after dinner with colleagues. Surveillance from a neighbor's Ring camera captured her pulling into the driveway. She carries takeout leftovers in one hand, unlocks her door with the other. What happened next inside that house is pieced together only from the evidence Daniel Collins left behind. At 8:42 p.m., the power on Pinehurst Lane flickered. Olivia's home was plunged into silence. Seconds later, neighbors heard a muffled cry. Then nothing. The following morning, Olivia Dawson's co-worker grew concerned when she missed a meeting. Police arrived by noon. Inside, they found signs of forced entry staged to look like a burglary gone wrong. Olivia's body lay in the bedroom. The cause, blunt force trauma.
We knew it wasn't random. Whoever did this wasn't after TVs or jewelry. He'd taken nothing. What we found instead was disturbing.
The signature was identical to the letters Marissa Parker had been receiving in Denver. The connection was now undeniable. The Ghost of Willow Creek had crossed state lines and killed. For the FBI, it marked the escalation of Daniel Collins from fraud suspect to murderer. His ability to live undetected despite being legally dead made the manhunt urgent.
When I heard it was Olivia, I wasn't surprised. Daniel, he used to say she ruined him. He'd repeat it over and over, like a mantra. She destroyed my life. One day, I'll destroy hers.
Investigators reconstructed Collins' movements, Chicago to Austin by rental car, purchased under an alias with cash. His trail was careful, but not invisible. Cameras picked him up at a gas station outside Waco. Witnesses described him as nervous, restless, avoiding eye contact. But it was what he left behind in Olivia's home that made the crime impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The evidence closed the gap between suspicion and certainty. Daniel Collins, declared dead 7 months earlier, was alive, and he had killed.
I thought maybe the letters were maybe someone tormenting me. But after Olivia, no. It's him. He's out there. And he won't stop.
When a dead man kills, you've got a problem. Every system, from credit to passports, had already buried him. He was invisible, and invisibility is power.
For authorities, the hunt was now global. Collins had already moved from Colorado to Chicago to Texas. The question was, where would he go next? The answer would soon emerge thousands of miles away, across the ocean, in Birmingham, United Kingdom. November 2024. More than 6,000 miles from Denver, the Ghost of Willow Creek had crossed another border. In Birmingham, England, investigators would find the final stage of Daniel Collins' transformation. Not from man to ghost, but from ghost to predator. The flat was rented under the name John Smith, a cliché pseudonym, but with papers convincing enough to satisfy a weary property manager. Paid in cash. No references. No fuss.
He said he was a contractor, just back from a job overseas. Quiet type. Didn't talk much. Paid 3 months up front. Look, in this business, you don't ask too many questions if the money's clean.
To neighbors, he was invisible. He left early, returned late, never greeted anyone. But inside, Collins was constructing a second life, and something darker. Investigators would later discover a chilling sight. A wall of connections, a murder map built like software code, precise and obsessive. Olivia's face was crossed out. Others, like Marissa and Reyes, remained uncircled. Unfinished business. Interpol entered the hunt when a U.S. passport flagged in London Heathrow system belonged to Daniel Collins. Though officially, he had no legal right to exist. He had purchased it with forged documents, but a glitch in the biometric scan alerted authorities.
We received notice from Interpol of a suspected American fugitive traveling under false papers. When we traced his trail, it led straight to Birmingham. Straight to Ashford Close.
Surveillance units were deployed. Days of observation produced the same pattern. A man, tall, late 40s, entering the flat at odd hours, rarely leaving before midnight. Grocery bags, disposable phones, always alone. There was no doubt now. The man Denver buried was alive and plotting.
When we got word from the UK, it was a race. We didn't know what his next move was, but we knew he wouldn't stop. A man who fakes his death to kill once, he'll do it again.
The flat was more than a hideout. It was a staging ground. A cache of documents suggested Collins was preparing for something larger. A return to America, a second act of vengeance. By mid-December, the order came down, move in. A joint operation between Interpol and West Midlands Police was planned to capture Daniel Collins alive.
We had him boxed in. No exits. No chance to slip away. Or so we thought.
Collins ran. Through alleys, over fences, weaving into the wet streets of Birmingham. But his heart, his body, could not keep pace with the life he had stolen for himself. Collins ran. Through alleys, over fences, weaving into the wet streets of Birmingham. But his heart, his body, could not keep pace with the life he had stolen for himself. Before he could escape, Daniel Collins suffered a massive heart attack.
We worked him for 20 minutes. Nothing. He was gone before we even loaded him into the ambulance.
This time death was not fate. The Ghost of Willow Creek had finally claimed his grave. In the end, Collins' own body stopped him before investigators could. The revenge he plotted was frozen in ink, unfinished on a wall thousands of miles from where it began. For Marissa Parker, the widow who was never a widow, the terror ended not with justice, but with inevitability.
They told me it was his heart, that he didn't make it. I didn't cry. I just sat there. I thought, he's really gone now. And I'll never know why he couldn't just let us live.
The hunt for Daniel Everett Collins ended not with a trial, nor with prison walls, but with silence in a Birmingham alley. The man who faked his death to kill had met his real one in flight. But when death closes one's story, it opens questions in the lives of those left behind.
It was like living in two funerals. First when I thought he was gone, then when I learned he wasn't, and then again when they told me he collapsed in England. People ask if I felt relief. I don't know if that's the word. Relief means you can breathe. I still feel like I'm holding my breath.
For Marissa, closure was never clean. For Jonathan Reyes, the landlord in Chicago, suspicion had nearly turned into tragedy.
think about it a lot. If I hadn't reported what I saw, who knows? Maybe there'd be more names on that wall in Birmingham. Maybe mine. I don't like to think about it, but it's there.
And for the family of Olivia Harper Dawson, the loss remained permanent. A woman who rebuilt her life after betrayal was forced to pay the highest price for a testimony she gave in good faith years earlier. Her murder was the pivot point, the proof that a ghost could still leave blood behind. Daniel Collins' story is not one of genius or even of perfect deception. His fake death was a trick, elaborate but flawed, a ruse that unraveled the longer it was worn. What kept him alive in truth was not craft, but disbelief. People wanted to believe he was gone. That was the only camouflage he needed.
It's rare, almost unheard of, for someone to stage their own death convincingly. But Daniel wasn't convincing. He was just lucky. For a while. And when luck ran out, his heart did the work for us.
At 7429 Willow Creek Drive, the house was eventually sold. A new family moved in, never knowing the name Collins except as a footnote in property records. The neighborhood trimmed its hedges, shoveled its sidewalks, and carried on. But stories, unlike houses, are not bought or sold. They linger, especially when the dead rise to walk again. Daniel's unfinished list will never be completed, but the fact that it existed, that he lived to create it, remains a warning.
We all live twice. Once in our bodies, once in the stories people tell after we're gone. Daniel tried to control both lives. In the end, he controlled neither.
The Ghost of Willow Creek has no resting place marked by truth. On paper, he died once. In reality, he died again. In memory, he lives as both, a man too unwilling to lose and too broken to win.